Hi and welcome to the next video. This is video number 2 from the Realtime chat app series with NestJS and Angular, and here we are adding some basic user endpoints in NestJS. So basically we make a get endpoint to get all the users that is paginated. We are making a post endpoint for logging in that also checks for the credentials, and we make a post endpoint to create a new user. We also work with bcrypt password hashing and comparing, and we also validate the incoming request as a DTO. So we check, for example, for the login request, is there an email provided, is there a password provided, is the email from type email, and we also, if we try to create a user, we check if the email is already in use and so on. So our structure is as always. First we have like a look at the video outcome, then we read the user story for this outcome, and then we implement the user story and close it. So let's have a quick overview of what we are doing here in this video. So here you can see we then have a post request for users where we can create a new user. It will check if the user is already existent in the database. So it says here email already in use. If I, for example, provide no email at all, then we also validate and say email is missing, that request. But if I give him like a new email, let's say like I think 3 is not given at the moment, then we have created a new user. We also have another endpoint that is returning all our users, and that is pageable. And we have a login endpoint where we can log in with the right credentials and we get like true. And in the next video series, we will also return here JWT. And we also check here if the password is valid. So we store a password hash in the database. So if we provide a wrong password, we say login was not successful. Or if we, for example, provide an email that is not existent, then we say we are not even finding the user. So let's have a quick look at the story for video number 2. The story is, as a developer, I want to be able to create one user. We actually can open this in preview here. I also want to log in with user credentials, and I want to be able to find all users, all these 3 via API calls. And if I try to create a user, it should first be checked. If the email, for example, is already in use, the password should always be stored as a hash in the database, so never store a plain password in your database. And if I try to log in, the provided password that I enter should be compared with the hash that is stored in the database. So we have some acceptance criteria here. First, we want to have like a new user module for NestJS. And there we have our user service, our user controller, where we have the endpoints, we have like our user models, everything that we need for this part of our application. Then we have in our user controller new endpoints that are a get endpoint to get all users. And we want to have a paginated response so that we can paginate through them. So we can, if we later have, for example, 100 users, we can, for example, ask our API for return the first 10 users or return the second page of 10 users and so on. Then we want to have a post endpoint where we create a new user. So we provide an email, a password, the username, for example, and we check if he already exists or not and create it. And we also want to be able to make a post request against the login route. And we want to log in based on email and password. So we want to check always if the email, if we create a user, is already in use. We will always want to store the password as a hash in our database, so never store the plain password. And we want to, if I try to log in, we want to compare the provided password against the hash in the database. So this is basically our story. And now we can try, or we can implement it. So first, as you remember in the last time, we can start everything here with Docker Compose up. And then we have our API and our front end. And at the moment, our API is just having one endpoint here that is returning from our user service, hello YouTube. And we fetch, or we get this response in our Angular front end. So if everything here is started, we can just go to our front end on localhost 4200 and wait till it's built. Takes a bit time. and then we should get displayed hello YouTube. So you can see now here we get hello YouTube from our API. So if we change this here, for example, to hello Twitch, and we save, then this here recompiles, and when we reload, we see hello Twitch. But since we are here on YouTube, we change this back. So we can now finish this here for the moment, and now we can start implement our API. So first we want to go or cd into our API folder. Now we are here in our Nest folder, and now we can use our Nest CLI to generate our module. So we can say Nest generate module user. So we want to generate a user module where we can handle all the stuff that is related to a user. Now you see we have here created our user module, empty at the moment, but we can fill it up. So then what we need is we want to be able to hash our password. For this we are going to use bcrypt. So with this we can hash our password, and we also can compare it. So when we search or compare, you can use bcrypt compare. You can use your plain password and compare it against the hash. Or for example, if you want to have a hash, you can make it with bcrypt.hash, give it a plain password, and then store it in your DB database. We also want to install NestJS typo and paginate. So this is like a very easy package that you can use to make pagination requests. So you can see it here. You can just use paginate from this package, provide some options, and then you get a paginated response here. Let's see, you can have here, when as a response you get items, and you have all your items here, and you also get metadata, how many items are there, so total items, items per page, what is the current page, and you get links, so you can, for example, build a linkable API. So we want to install both of them. So we install, or we copy this here, and we want to save it also. I think it's default. So first this, then we also want to use bcrypt for hashing the password. So we install this or save it here also to our package JSON. And we later also do some validation stuff with DTOs. So we can search for class validator npm for this package here. And can install this also. Then there is another, then we can, if this is installed, we can create here our controller, our services, and our models. So the first thing that we want to do is here to create our models or our entities. So we can just call it the folder model. And then we have here like another folder for DTOs. And we also first need our entity so that we can store something to our database. So here we can simply say export class, and this is our user entity. And since we are using here type ORM, we can say add entity from type ORM. And then we have to think about what properties does like the user has. So the user always has a number, and this is like the primary column, and this should be generated. So we can use a primary generated column from type ORM. The user should also have a username from type string. It should also have an email, which is also a string, a password So this is also a string. So here we want just to store the hash. And we always want to store the email as lowercase in our database so we can easily compare against it. So if we search for it, so we can say this.email is always this.email to lowercase. So, and we have to annotate this with before insert. So before we insert a value, we always make the email lowercase. And now we can add here some stuff. So the username should be a column. The email also. But this should also be unique because there can never be two users that are having the same email. And then we can make something because if we later make, for example, a find one, so where we just want to return a user or return multiple users from the database, then we don't always want to use the password. And so we can give the column here some options, and this means select. So you can see here, the column decorator select is used to mark a specific class property as a table. Select. So here indicates if a column is always selected by query builder and find operations. Default avoided value is true. So we can set this to false. And this means if we make a request with type ORM and try to find a user here, then it all automatically strips off the password from the return. So we don't have to do this manually in our code. And if we want to get the password, we have to specifically select the password also in our code. But this saves us here quite some time. Then we can add here like a user interface that we also need. So we can say user.interface.ts. And here we can say export interface user interface. And then we have here like an optional ID number, username, email, and password, also optional, and save it. And then we can go to our the DTOs, so that we need to validate incoming requests. But before we do this, we can also start by making our controller. So we can here again use the nest CLI and say nest generate controller user. This should generate here user controller. Oh, I hope so, and not on the top. User controller, and we already imported this here. So, but to make it easier to find, let's make here our own folder for controller. And then in our module, we have to update the path. So this is now controller/user controller. And here we have to specify all of the stuff that we are using. So we can, for example, cd here, cd into user. And now we can also say nest generate service. And now we want to generate our user service for our user module. And you see it here. Now we automatically have it here as a provider, our user service. And we rename this folder to service. And this updates automatically. And another thing that we have to do is we need to have some imports. And here we need the type ORM module, and we have to import for feature. So this is basically type ORM module dot for feature. And I think here we have to provide the entities for this module, and this is just our user entity for the user module. here the user entities, the type ORM module knows how to configure everything. So and now we have here our controller, and this should be like a plural. And then we can make our API, or we can build our API, and here we then also use the DTOs and the interfaces and everything, so the models. So of course we need a constructor, because we need to inject our user service. So we can say here private user service, and then first probably we can make a post request to create a user. So here we can make a post request. We use this from NestJS common and say we want to create a user. And so we want to, as a response, return an observable from a user interface type. And then we have to do here some logic to create the user. And the first thing that we want to check here is we get something in the body from the request. This is the user, for example, the email, the username, the password. Then we want to check if these are all provided and if they are there. So we say we have here like our create user DTO. And we first have to create it. So we can go into here and we can say create user.dto.ts, and we can export a class create user DTO, and we can also have a DTO for login user DTO. And so we first can make this class here, and this is very simple. We have like the email, which is from type string, and we have a password that is also a string. And then with the class validator, we can check, for example, at is email. So this checks if it is an email, and the password should never be empty. So if we register a user or if someone is logging in, we always need a not empty. We always need the password. So we annotate it with this, and here we also need the email and the password, and we extend just our user or login user DTO, but we also need one more, that is the username. And here we can, for example, check if it's string. And we can check it is not empty. So then we can use them in our controller. And yeah, we can check for this. And if we want to check for these here, we also have to include it here, app. I think we can Google it. So NestJS validation pipe. So we can just use here the validation pipe, and then always if it finds a DTO, it tries to validate it. We can check this then later in our API if everything works fine. So for example, we can just check this out at the moment. So we can say return true. Oops. Now we have to make it an observable. And then we can build it. So we can say, first we have to cd to our Docker Compose file. So then we can say Docker Compose build, and then we can start it, and then we can try to access this endpoint, and then we should see that it tries to validate the user DTO. So we can already start up Postman. And then we also, I think, have to have a deeper look into bcrypt, if this is working all correctly. So here we have Postman, so we can, for example, try to make then our post request against localhost 3000/API/users. We make a post request, we have to wait till our API is up, and then this here should work, or it should try to validate the DTO that we provide or that we not provide, the properties. So let's in the meantime check our Docker Compose file, and I think this here is probably wrong, so we want to have this inside our container, so we can update this, and we can also remove this here, because otherwise we would copy the stuff here, and it wouldn't make any sense, because then we would copy the bcrypt stuff from our node modules here into our application. So we can remove this, and then we can also restart this here. I hope this goes a lot faster. So now it's building the front end. And then we can try to make some requests. So we can also, we can already go on Docker Compose up and try to start everything here. So let's make it a little bit bigger for you to see. Now let's give it some time. So here's our API. So the class transformer package is missing. Please make sure to install this library. Class transformer, I thought we had installed it. Let's have a quick look. Ah, no, we didn't install it. So we need the class transformer package. So let's see, can we find it here? No. And then we can just use it from here. cd in out to our API, save it. And then we have to rebuild our Docker stuff. So we can search here, npm class transformer package. And then we can build it again. And while this is running, we can already add some endpoints here. So we want, for example, to have another find all here, where we find all our users, so we can make it a simple get. And then we want also to have a login endpoint from type post. So these are just empty, but we will fill them later. We are finished here. So let's read a bit here. So here we have like our validation pipe, and we can just use it like we did. So then we ensure that all endpoints are protected from receiving incorrect data. And for example, we have here our create user DTO, basically the same that we are having here in our code. And then this checks, for example, for email, for is not empty, exactly like we do. And if it, for example, checks that there is an email that is not having an ad or something like this, then it says bad request, the value has to be, for example, email. So we can start it again now. Let's see if then all the packages are there. So now let's see if everything works fine here, and then we can try to check if it is working. So now we have our API started, so we can make like a post request. And now you see we have all the validations that fail. So we have username should not be empty, it must be a string, email must be an email, and password should not be empty. So for example, we could now give him some values, and we can say first we have our email, let's say thomas@thomas.com. We have password, let's go with easy password, and yeah, I think that should be the username. And now we can try again, and now it returns true. And if I, for example, provide an email without an ad, then this should also fail because email is not an email. So the validation works, and now we have to implement the rest. So because we don't want to just return a boolean, so first we want to, if the user DTO is correct, we want to map it to like our interface. So for this we can, for example, create a new or a helper service. So we can say nest generate service user helper, and then we can say in our service we have a user service. This is our existing user service, so we just moved into this folder. And we have our user helper service that we also move to service. And here we can just map something. And here we have to update the import. So now we can go to our user helper service and add two simple functions here. So first we want to make create user DTO to our entity. So our input is like our create user DTO from type create user DTO, and we want to return an observable from user interface. So we can simply say return when we make it an observable of, and we return an object. And here we say email is create user DTO.email. We have our username, create user, create user DTO.username, and we have the password, create user DTO.password. And the second is we want the login user DTO to entity also. So we have here login user DTO, and we also return here an observable from user interface. And we make the same return off, and then we return our object. And here we have our email, login user DTO.email, and we have the password from login user DTO.password. Can save this. And then we can also import the service here. So we say private user helper service, user helper service. And we also have to make sure that it's in our providers here, and we can use it. So we can then simply start here with return this.userHelperService.create user DTO to entity. We use here the create user DTO. So as soon as we hit this endpoint here, the validation pipe checks if this is valid, like we saw in our Postman request. And when we go into it, we create our user interface or our user. And then we can make it pipe and switch map. And then we have here our user. And then from our user service, we want to call our create. And now we have to make our everything here in our user service. So first we need our constructor, and we have to inject our repository. So this is basically simple. So we use inject repository from NestJS type ORM, and this is for our user entity. And then we say private read-only user repository from type repository user entity. And then we want to make like our create, where we have our new user from user interface, and we map all the DTOs on the controller level, and then here in our service we just work with the objects or the entities or the interfaces, so that like the controller you can change everything, but this here will still work. And here we want to make an observable or return an observable from the user interface. And here first we want to check if our email exists. So before we enter this, we make like a private function here, and we check if the mail exists. And as input we get the email from type string, and we will return an observable as a Boolean value. So we can easily then say return from. So here we just make from our user repository, we use defined one. And then we provide an option, and we want to query for email or only for email. And then we can pipe this, and we map the user that we get back. And we have to import map from RxJS operators. And then we can say if we have an existing user, then we return true. If not, we return, of course, false. So then the first function, the first that we do here in our create, we say we want to return this.mail exists, and then we give him our email and check for this. Then we can pipe it and make a switch map. And then we get like a boolean back, so we can name this, for example, exists. So if the user exists, which is from type boolean, and then we can make, or we can check. So if the user is not existing, we want just think about this. So basically we want to say if exists is true, then we want to make some stuff, and else we can actually throw an exception. So we throw new HTTP exception and say, for example, email is already in use. And we have to provide HTTP status code. And here we can say conflict because it's already existing. And then if we have it, we can say, what is it saying here? So then we can return this, and then we want to hash our password. So we need here like another function, private, let's say hash password. And this should take like the password from type string. And we also want to return an observable from type string, because this is then the hash. And here we simply want to use decrypt. So let's check this here. So we get decrypt, then we can use this should return something like a string, and then we simply convert our decrypt and use our hash. And here we just provide the password and we say 12 solid rounds, and then we can use it here. So then we want to hash our password, and for this we say new user dot password, and we pipe this here again. And then we want to return from our user repository and want to save the new user. So we make a save, we save the new user, and we have to pipe the outcome also, because the save would return the user with sorry, here we need the password, which is a string. So I think we have here, where are we? So this pipe closes here. This closes here, and we need this, and this should be fine. We can reformat it. So then we want to save the new user, and since we don't want to store the plain password, we have to override the password from our user with the password that we are getting here. So we could, for example, name this password hash that we get back from our function, and so we can just make a comment to make it easier, override the user password with the hash to store the hash in the database. To make it clearer. And then this save would normally return the complete user object, so with password, but we don't want this in return. So we have to make a switch map, and then we could either strip the password of it, or we can simply make another find one request and use here the user.id, and then since we have now entity with select false, it should not return the password. So for this we can make here like another function. So we can say private find one. We say we have as an input the ID number, and we have here also an observable, and we return the user. And then we can simply say return from. Then we use our user repository. And we look for him by the ID. And then this should work, I think. So we can now in our user controller use then here our user. And then we are not returning here a boolean anymore, but the user interface. And we have to import switch map. And then we can check if this works. So we can fire it up. And then we can try to create a user. And we can also connect against our database. So as you remember, we have here our Postgres adminer that we can access on port 5050, I think. So we can go to localhost 5050. And if it started correctly, we should be able to access it. Yeah, so we have it here. Then we have to look up what was the credentials, so admin and admin, and password, so we can then log in and connect to our database. So we can add a new server. Let's call it database. Say the connection is Postgres. The maintenance database is DB, so all as we said it here in our Postgres. And the username was user, and we have password, so user password. We try to connect, and then we see that we have here our database. And we can also check that we have like created everything. So you see we have here our user entity table. At the moment it is empty, I think. Now we can make here our request with this stuff. now email is already in use, so let's try with another email. Maybe I tried something with this before. Or our code is incorrect. So let's see what we get in return here. When we create, so you see here we get false. So we have to change this up. So if the user is not existing, of course, then we want to hash the password. So we can actually shorten this to if it's not existing. Then we want to hash the password and we want to create the user. So let's remove this here, cancel the request. And you see now we have it created. And now we should find the user in our database. Let's have a look how I can query this here. Select all from user entity. Maybe this works. Yeah, so you see here, now we have the ID 1, my username, my email, and we store the password as a hash. So then we can make like the next or the other requests. Let's make it here, but this is just the Postgres adminer tool logging everything out. We have to. So then, for example, we could do the which endpoint can we do? Maybe define all. So this is also a get request. And what we can also do, as we see here, we get in return a 201 created. This is good. And on define all, we say we have like here query parameters. This is page. We name it page. This should be from type number. And the default, if nothing is provided, we have the first page. And then we have the limit from type number and default to 10. And then we want to return also an observable. And here we use the pagination from the NestJS pagination package. And then here, this should also be from type user, so our items here. And then we can check, because we never want to return more than 100 users. We say if the limit is bigger than 100, then we can make it a shortcut, then use 100, or else use this the number that is given. So then we want to return our user service dot find all. And I think this is at the moment not existing, so we have to do this. And this is very easy because we get like a pagination object. So this is pagination options from the package NestJS typo and paginate. We return an observable. Also from type pagination and user interface. And then we can very simple make it from. We call the paginate from the same package. We want to return the user entity. and we use our user repository, and then we specify the options, and this should work fine. So then here in our find all, we have to specify the pagination options. So we can pass in an object, and first we have our page, we have our limit. For example, we want to return the first page with 10 users, whatever, and we can specify a route. So the base route that should be added to the links. So at the moment this should be localhost 3000/API/users, and then we can try to make GET request against this here. So let's say localhost 3000 API users and make a GET. And now you see we get like our pagination object, which has items, so just one user at the moment, metadata, how many total items, count, items per page, and so on, and also links. So we don't have a previous and next because we just have one at the moment. If I create here another user with another email, and then run this request again, then you see we have here 2 users. So this also works fine. And then the third one is we want to be able to log in. And here, we can, we have to provide also in our request body some stuff. So this is our login user DTO. So that the validation pipe will check if all the stuff that we need is provided and is correctly. And right now we can just return a Boolean, but in the next video we will generate a JWT with all the user properties that we need, so that we can later save all our requests from our frontend to our backend with this JWT, so to authenticate the user. So first here again we have to use our user helper service and create our user entity from our DTO. So we pass in our login user DTO. And then we use our outcome here to make a switch map, because then we do have a user. And then we can go against our user service, and then we need like a login function that we now have to do. So we make it, or we name it login. And we take a user from user interface, and we return at the moment an observable Boolean, and we can annotate this here with a comment and say change to JWT in next video. Or let's say refactor to use JWT in next video. So then we say we first want to find our user by email, and we also have to create this here. So we say private find by email. And of course we have to provide our email, which is a string. And as a return, we have an observable user interface. And then we make return from this.user repository. We want to find one. We want to find with the email. But as you remember here, when we find one here, we would not return the password. But since we are logging in, we need the password. So because we have here provided password, and then we get the password hash from our database. So here, so that we can check it if the password is correct. So we can specify here some stuff, and we can say for options, so we want to select, and what we want to select are, we want to have the ID, we want to have the email, we want to have the username, and we want to have the password. And then this returns also the password, because since you remember our user entity, we have select false, so by default find one, it will not return the password, but if we specify it here with select, it returns the password, so the hash, and we can compare it. So then in our login, or we can also make a comment here, also returns the password. So then we can use it here. So we can simply say that we want to do this function here. So find user by email, and we specify the user.email, and then we pipe the outcome, and we make a switch map, and our user is our user interface, or let's say found user, so that we name it differently. And then we make some stuff with it. So if we have found a user, when we do something, else we will throw an exception. So we could say we throw new HTTP exception, user not found, HTTP status not found. And then if we have found a user, we want to validate our password. So at the moment, we also don't have this function here. So we need it. And here we can also use decrypt. So we have our password as a string that is from our request. And then we have like our, let's say, stored password hash, that is also a string. And we get like the boolean back. And then we can very simple use decrypt.compare. And we can just have a quick look at it. So you can see when we go to the compare, we have here the plain text password. So this is what the user is providing in his request. So if you log in, then we have here our user, and we have the password that he's providing. And then we get here from our database, find by email, our found user back with the password hash. So then we have to compare our password against the password hash that is stored in the database. So like we do here, and then this either will return true or false if the password and the hash, or if the hashes matches or not. So we say compare, and then we just give him the password and the stored password hash. So we can then use it here and simply give him first our user.password and second the found user.password. And then we can pipe the outcome again, make a switch map, and we can simply say this matches. So if we match, we have a true, and if not, we have a false. So if matches is true, or else. So if it is not true, we can simply again throw an HTTP exception and say login was not successful, wrong credentials, and we can provide the HTTP status, for example, unauthorized. And here we can return this.find1 because we don't want to return the user that we found here because he has the password. And we can simply name found user.id. And at the moment we are returning here boolean, so we can simply say pipe and map to, so we map it to a true value. the pipe, and then in the next video we change this to JWT. So what is he saying here? Empty block statement. Why? No. No, I think this is false. Let's open this again. Yeah, now it's gone. Here, so now we should have this working. So here we have to provide then our user here that we converted from our user DTO. And then we should return true. So we can also check this endpoint here. So we say localhost 3000 API users /login, because here we have to make it, of course, a login route. And then we can try. So if we now make a simple post request against it, the validation pipe says we need an email and we need a password. So we have to give him an email and a password. So we say email, and we say password. So now it should say email must be email. So we can, for example, use here this email. So both users, as you remember, have the same password at the moment. So this should return true. And if I now give him a false password, then the password validation in our login. So here the password validation should fail, and we should throw like a HTTP exception, login not successful from credentials. And you see we get a 401 unauthorized, login was not successful from credentials. If I change this up again, I get it mapped to true. So like I said, in the next video, we want to make this here that this returns a valid JWT. And then we also make like an authentication module so that we can then move all the stuff for authentication and password hashing and so on, move to the other modules so that we have separated everything correctly. So now I think we're already at the end of this video. We can check against our user story if everything was correct. Here, so we are in story number 2, of course. So we have now a new user module for NestJS. We have a new get endpoint. We have a new users endpoint, and we have a login endpoint. And we check if the email is already in use, otherwise we are not creating anything. We check, or we always save the password as a hash in our database, so we can check this also. And we compare the password to the hash on login. As you remember, if not, this fails here. So in the next video, or in the next story, we want to then return proper JWT. We want to make something to check the roles if you're able to access or to get all users, for example. Here. So I think here is everything done now. So now just commit everything so we can stop Docker Compose here. And then we say git add upper-a, and we make a commit message. So let's first have a quick look for the commits, how we named the last. Okay, video 1 prefix. Okay, so let's do it the same here. Video 2. And now we can say edit user module and endpoints for creating login and get all users. And can push it.